I want you to tell a story about your best day at the White House and your worst day at the White House.
Well, there are a lot of days that could sort of fit some of those descriptions.
I want specific examples.
You want specific examples, huh? You're demanding answers early in the morning.
Right.
It's good. It makes you a good reporter. Well, we do the bad news first. I will say that one of the, it's hard to, I think after 7 years, it's hard to choose off the top of my head the worst. But I will describe a particularly difficult day at the briefing that I did. And it was the day that we talked announced as a government and talked about the death of Kayla Mueller. She was an American hostage that had been taken by ISIL. And the United States government was responsible for announcing her death, or at least confirming her death. And it was hard to talk about. And one of the reasons is that I obviously, before the briefing, had spent some time learning about her. And her parents, I think, in very moving fashion after learning of her death, had released publicly a letter that she had sent to them. And this was a letter that she had smuggled out of captivity. I think she'd given it to one of her captors who had been released. And she was able to get that, or their fellow captors were able to get that to her parents. And she talked very movingly about why she was in Syria and what she was doing there. And she described how, she was an aid worker, and she described how she saw God in the eyes of people who were suffering. And she felt compelled, she felt a calling to go and try to serve those people. And I was really moved by her story and by her passion and by her commitment to her faith and to a set of moral values that were deeply ingrained. And I was really inspired by her passion and found her death to be a real tragedy. And that was a difficult thing to talk about publicly. So that was definitely a challenging.
You got a little
time.
choked up.
I did get a little choked up in talking about it. On a happier note, there have been a lot of really fun, fascinating days at the White House. Certainly one of the benefits of this job has been the opportunity to travel around the world with the president. So even though they may not have taken place at the White House, there have been some really interesting, fascinating things that I've had the opportunity to see around the world in the context of this job. So there are trips to Asia and to Africa that are memorable and things that I will remember.
What's your favorite memory?
But in terms of the White House, I think there was and I think this is true of a lot of people who have covered the Obama administration, but even sort of people over the last 7 years watching the president, was the night and then the day after we announced that Osama bin Laden had been killed. This was a very closely held secret at the White House. There was not a broad awareness among the staff. I was not among those who was read in on this secret mission. But to learn about what had happened was inspired a great sense of pride in our men and women in uniform, first and foremost. These are men and women who displayed tremendous courage, both in the intelligence community, but also the members, the special operators who carried out the mission. I think there was great pride that was taken in the ability of the United States government to undertake such a significant action and keep it a secret, prevent it from becoming public, to protect the integrity of the operation. But also a lot of pride in the president's courage to order that mission. I think it was immediately obvious to everybody, even after they'd heard about the mission, the kinds of risks that entailed, both in terms of the lives of these individuals, but also in terms of the credibility of the United States government. So it was a big risk, but it clearly was worth it. And it was a really satisfying day.
Before we carry on with the president's legacy, you guys made some news yesterday. I wanted to touch upon that a bit. What are you going to do to sort of, I know a lot of progressive groups are a little upset with this pick that you made for the Supreme Court. What are you going to do to assuage those people who are not so happy with this?
Well, listen, I think that as people have the opportunity to consider Chief Judge Garland's record, I think people on both sides of the aisle recognize that he is somebody who's eminently qualified. He's got unquestioned legal credentials. He actually has more experience on the federal bench than any other nominee in the history of the Supreme Court. So he's eminently qualified. He's got exactly the kind of track record you would like to see, and a fair-minded judge who understands that he has a responsibility to interpret the law and not advance a political agenda. There are some who have been strong advocates of the president seeking to diversify the federal bench. And when it comes to the president's record of doing that, the president doesn't take a backseat to anybody. The president appointed the first Hispanic justice to the Supreme Court. He appointed the third and fourth women to serve on the Supreme Court. And when you take a look at the federal judiciary at large, there are 118 minority judges that have been appointed by President Obama. That's more than any other president in history. The president has appointed more African American women, more Hispanics, more Asians, more LGBT Americans to the federal bench than any other president.
Right.
And so the president's record of making sure that we have a federal judiciary that looks more like the country is second to none. And the president's proud of that record. And I think as long as we're talking about the president's legacy, I do think that this is one of the president's legacy achievements of choosing talented Americans to serve on the federal bench in a way that ensures that we have a justice system that is administered by judges who look like America.
What are you going to do? Can you kind of map out the path forward? Are we going to see him speak out a little bit? How are you guys going to keep sort of the pressure on to get him through? Yeah.
Well, the Chief Judge Garland will be traveling to Capitol Hill today. He has meetings scheduled on Capitol Hill with individual members of the Senate. This is sort of the standard operating procedure for Supreme Court nominees, that they spend some time visiting privately with individual members of the United States Senate prior to hearings before the Judiciary Committee. So he certainly is looking forward to those meetings. He spent a decent portion of the day yesterday preparing for those meetings. And we have, Chairman Grassley has committed to meet with Chief Judge Garland as well. So that's an indication that this process is slowly moving forward, and we're going to continue to press the case that this is somebody who has been described by Republicans as a consensus nominee. And the suggestion that somehow the raucous political debate in this country is an excuse for the Senate to not fulfill their constitutional responsibility, I don't think that even passes the smell test for most people, Democrat or Republican. In fact, I think you could make the case that the president's commitment to appointing somebody that even Republicans describe as a consensus nominee is the best case we could possibly make for why the Senate should move forward even in this political environment. I think you would make the case that, especially in this political environment, the Senate has even more of a responsibility than they've ever had before to act on somebody that they acknowledge is a genuinely consensus nominee.
But what are your plans going forward past this week? What are you going to give us a sense of how you're going to sort of?
Well, look, I would anticipate that we'll have additional, that Chief Judge Garland will continue to have additional meetings with members of the Senate, and there are 6 or 7 Republicans who have committed to having a meeting with him. There are a number of Democrats who've indicated that they're going to have a meeting with him, and so we're going to let this process play out, and we're going to continue to make the case publicly that the Senate has a constitutional duty to act, and they should not avoid that responsibility because of the political season. In fact, given the nature of our politics and given the fact that the president's put forward a consensus nominee, I actually think that it's even more important than ever before for them to follow this process by the book. And look, over the last 40 years, it's been about 67 days that Supreme Court nominees have gone from being nominated to being confirmed. So there's ample time for the Senate here to act. And since 1875, every single Supreme Court nominee that's been put forward by a president has got a hearing and or a vote. So it would be unprecedented since 1875 for Republicans to prevent somebody that even they acknowledge is a highly qualified candidate from being shown that same kind of consideration.
Can you give us a sense of what President Obama is like behind the scenes? Because you talk to my mom and she thinks he's really gregarious and lovely. You talk to some people who think he's really aloof. Yeah. And I want to know how he's changed over the last 7 years, like what you've seen in him. So a 2-part question. Let's start with the first.
Yeah, I think that the best insight that people can have into the kind of person that he is to remember that he began his career as a community organizer. This is somebody who thrives on his ability to interact with people, somebody who enjoys working together with people to solve problems, somebody who's passionate about being engaged in a community, somebody who cares deeply about justice, but also somebody who really thrives on working with people to solve problems.
What have you seen, though, in your observations with him?
Yeah. Well, I think a good example, actually, would be the president recently traveled to, just last week, to Texas, where he participated in an event at South by Southwest. And while he was there, he had an opportunity to have a couple of private meetings with some leaders in the tech industry about some of the initiatives that we've prioritized, including incorporating the social media industry in our efforts to prevent ISIL from using social media to radicalize vulnerable people around the world. And the reason I'm raising this is that the president did those behind-the-scenes meetings. He did an hour-long conversation on stage to talk about technology and the impact it's having on our economy and our society and on our government. And then he proceeded from there to do a couple of fundraisers. And so this is a long stretch of 8 hours of the president being in the public eye and being engaged in conversations with people who are really excited to talk to him, people with a variety of perspectives. And I was a little tired after watching all of it. But we get in the car and we're headed to the airport in Austin to fly to Dallas. And the president's reading the clips and talking about flipping through his iPad and seeing what's in the news and eager to talk about his conversations. And he's somebody who really thrives on and is passionate about getting outside the bubble of the presidency. And I think so this is sort of the segue to answering your second question. I think this is the thing that the president would say he has found to be among the most challenging aspects of the presidency, is that he does have significant responsibilities as president that require him to spend a lot of time at the White House. And that means not nearly as much time in the public, interacting with people from a wide variety of perspectives that he would really like to do, which means that he relishes every opportunity that he has to do that. And it's not a coincidence, as those of you who follow the presidency close, that it's pretty unusual for us to have a week like we're having this week, where the president remains in Washington for the entire week. Typically, there's a day or two a week where the president wants to get outside of Washington and go and talk to people across the country about their priorities, about the way they have been affected or benefited from some of the policies that he has put in place, understanding some of the problems that remain, and talking through potential solutions to those problems. That's what the president views as being at the core of his job, and it's something that he genuinely enjoys.
What's his biggest regret, would you say, so far?
Well, the president talked in the State of the Union address about how when he was elected in 2008 and took office in 2009, there was this great hope across the country that our system of government and our political debate was pretty divided and pretty polarized. And the president was elected on the hope that he was somebody who might be able to bridge some of that partisan divide. After all, he had burst onto the national scene in 2004 by giving a speech at the Democratic Convention in Boston, where he talked about how we're not a red America and a blue America, but we're the United States of America, and talking about how what we have in common far exceeds what divides us. And in his final State of the Union address, the president observed that he has been disappointed that he hasn't been able to do more to bridge that divide. And I think there are a variety of reasons for that. And
does he accept responsibility, do you think, for that?
I think the way the president would say is that he certainly wishes that we could have done more, and he is willing to accept his share of responsibility as President of the United States for having not succeeded in getting that done. Now, one of the reasons he didn't succeed in getting that done is because there was a well-documented, comprehensive strategy that was implemented by Republicans to obstruct every single thing that the president wants to do, even if they are things that Republicans have previously strongly supported on their own. And I think the clearest example that we have of that over the last 8 years is the president putting forward a consensus nominee to the Supreme Court, and Republicans not just opposing that person, but refusing to even meet with that person, refusing to hold hearings for the first time since 1875. And the consequences, frankly, for Republicans have been even more significant than the consequences for Democrats. And I've made this observation over the last couple of weeks, too, which is that when Republicans adopt a position of not just disagreeing with the president and putting forward their own ideas that are different than the ideas that the president has put forward, that's not been the approach that congressional Republicans have taken. In fact, what we've seen from congressional Republicans is to basically say, no, we're not going to put forward an alternative. We're not going to consider your ideas. We're just going to oppose them and try to block them at every step. And I think that is precisely the reason that they have ended up with a leading presidential contender on the Republican side that doesn't share any of their policy ideas. And that's because congressional Republicans in Washington have not been putting forward or advocating for specific ideas. They've just been saying no. And what that means is, essentially when you have congressional Republicans, Republican leaders in Washington, D.C., that don't stand for something, Republican voters across the country, frankly, are in a position where they're going to fall for anything. In this case, they've fallen for Donald Trump.
You think the acrimony that was building up on the Hill was bubbled up into Donald Trump?
Well, I don't think it's as much acrimony as much as it's that there are no Republican ideas. Mm-hmm. And no one is suggesting, even, again, I think Leader McConnell would make this observation if he were being honest and sitting in this chair with you today. He would acknowledge that Mr. Trump hasn't put forward really many ideas, and the ideas that he's put forward many of them are pretty inconsistent with the kinds of values and priorities that Republicans have long championed. Mm-hmm. And the reason that Republican voters have fallen for that is because there has not been a sustained effort on the part of Republicans to actually advocate for ideas. Mm-hmm. Right now, you see, even in the House of Representatives, this is sort of the other hallmark example from the course of this year. A few days before the president released his budget, for the first time in 40 years, House Republicans, before the budget was released, said, you know what, we're not even going to meet with the president's budget director to talk about the president's budget proposal when he puts it out. So they didn't want to engage in a debate about a budget. And now what do we see? We see that Republicans in the House of Representatives once again are prepared to not pass a budget, that they can't build support in their caucus for a budget in the House. And I think that is another good example of Republicans adopting a position of not just that we disagree with the president, but that we won't even consider the ideas that he's put forward because he's the one who's put them forward. We're not going to feel any obligation on our part to put forward our own ideas.
Mm-hmm. Does the president, I want to talk about race a little bit because we have the first African-American president, and race has seemed to bubble up since his time in office. Does the president think that race has progressed in our nation over the last 8 years?
Mm-hmm. I think what the president would observe is that it is impossible and foolish to deny the important progress that our country has made, not just over the last several decades, but even over the last several years. That's not to suggest that all of the problems have been solved, mm-hmm. But there's a reason that people around the country and around the world, indeed, celebrated the accomplishment that we made as a country mm-hmm. In choosing someone named Barack Hussein Obama to lead the country. Mm-hmm. That says something, frankly, that says more about our country than it does about President Obama. Mm-hmm. And that's an important thing and something that our country should be proud of. At the same time, we've still got some significant challenges that we have to confront as a country. Mm-hmm. But to deny that we have made progress mm-hmm. Is to deny the effectiveness of people who have committed their lives to the cause of civil rights. Mm-hmm. There are certainly people who are better positioned to speak to this than I am, but mm-hmm. The president talked very movingly last spring, about a year ago, in Selma, Alabama, right. And talking about Congressman John Lewis and the other young men and women who put their lives on the line and demonstrated tremendous courage in fighting for the cause of justice and civil rights and universal human rights. Mm-hmm. And there's no denying the progress that our country has made as a result of their courage and their service and their sacrifice. And all of us, all Americans, black, white, Hispanic, gay and straight, owe them a debt of gratitude for making our country closer, helping our country live up more effectively to the potential that we have.
Is it something he'll continue to do in his post-presidency?
I'm confident that one of the president's priorities, even after he leaves office, will be to continue to build efforts to mentor and nurture the next generation of Americans. And the president's talked about his My Brother's Keeper initiative, and this is a program that's organized to pay particular attention to young men of color. And this is something that the president feels deeply about. The president, of course, grew up in a household where his father wasn't around, and he understands the profound impact that can have on boys and young men in particular. And this is something that the president will spend a lot of his post-presidency on.
Okay, I want to do a quick lightning round.
Okay.
So, can I ask it this way? Has the president voted for a woman for president in the last week or so?
The president has cast a ballot for, in the Democratic primary in Illinois. He voted absentee. But the president has chosen to keep the names on the ballot that he checked private.
No hints?
No hints.
I mean, I had to push. What will the president, one thing, miss the most about Washington?
I mean, I think if the president were sitting here, the thing that he would say is he recognizes that having served as President of the United States was the greatest honor of his life. And the reason that he has sought to try to make the most of this opportunity is because it has given him an opportunity over the last 7 years to fight for the values that he cares about the most, to try to move the country in the direction of a more perfect union.
But what will he miss?
And I think what he'll miss is a
tangible thing.
Well, I think he'll genuinely. I think he views that as a tangible thing. He misses that he will miss that opportunity to be in a position where he's at the center of that fight, and being able to set priorities, and being able to articulate a vision, and to be able to advocate for those values that he cares about the most. That is the thing that he has valued most about the presidency, and he's gonna miss that when he's gone.
The flights on Air Force One.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's some more basic things. I think the thing that the president, there are many challenges to the presidency, but one of the things that he likes the most, I'm sure, is Marine One. Having a helicopter to get you around is pretty convenient.
Last one, March Madness. Okay. Any hints on the president's bracket?
Well, the president's bracket has just gone public, so I encourage people to go check it out at whitehouse.gov. He has chosen the Kansas Jayhawks to win the NCAA tournament. So we'll see how that turns out. Behind. That is something I could get behind.
Okay. Thank you, Josh, for joining us.
No problem. Thank you for having me.